Welcome, Book Dragons, to another exciting story time, read to you by Timothy Bateson. In this episode, I bring you The Rose by PD Alleva. Story time starts in 3, 2, 1. Ben's eyes rolled open to a striking light. A sharp pain squeezed from his eyeballs to the centre of his brain. He pinched the bridge of his nose. Eyelids fluttered open. His head was heavy and weary. He lay on a bed in an otherwise empty room. No windows, only painted white concrete walls that exuded heat, igniting a burning sensation that formed beads of sweat across Ben's forehead, torso, arms, and legs. His head and thoughts groggy. Realizing he had no clue where he was, he forced himself to a sitting position, recognizing he was naked. Where am I? Of course, the first question concerned location. What happened? Sandy? He held his head, feeling a painful twitch in his abdomen and right forearm that dropped his left hand to his navel, and his shoulders to arch and constrict. His face flinched in pain, squinting his eyes. The pain squirmed from his navel to his chest and throat, igniting a burning in the back of his brain. What? Eyes wide open now, studying his forearm and a tattoo of 4 symbols like hieroglyphics, running from his wrist to his elbow that had not been there before. The skin was irritated around the tattoo, and Ben ran his fingers across the symbols, hoping it would have been no more than a marker-drawn symbol than a permanent design, with no such luck. He'd been branded by... that lady? The thought of the short, thin woman shrieked in his memory, her hands over Sandy's stomach, his thoughts interrupted by a click at the door, eyes fixed on the turning knob. The door opened, and in came an older man, an American, dressed in scrubs and white doctor's coat. Short in stature, his sandy blonde hair was worn like a dishevelled mop that hung over his forehead just above his blue eyes. "Mr. Cox," he said, offering his hand. "Dr. Blum." Ben ignored the offering. "What the hell is going on here?" Dr. Blum paused. A gruff smile curled on the corner of his mouth. "Mr. Cox, your behaviour was witnessed to be rather erratic and rebellious." "By who?" Ben's voice was abrupt. Dr. Blum sighed, shook his head, and cocked his eyebrows. "By those in charge, Mr. Cox. And you were brought to me." "Who's in charge? What behaviour? All I did was obey what I was told. I never behaved with any resistance. Brought to me to prepare you for reconditioning." Ben shook his head. "Reconditioning for what?" "Of your behaviour, Mr. Cox. For those that are in charge. They..." Dr. Blum paused, as if searching for the appropriate words. Cocked his head, eyes squinted. "Delight in people like yourself." "Delight?" "Well, we ran tests. You're in perfect health, no diseases, no signs of any hormonal imbalances, and you're obviously potent, considering your wife is pregnant." "What's that got to do with any of this?" "Where is my wife? Where's Sandy? How's the baby?" "Perfectly fine, Mr. Cox. There's no cause for concern with those two. They'll be taken care of better than we are, that's for sure." "I want to see them. Where are they?" "Your second child, correct?" Ben shot Dr. Blum a baffled stare. His eyes narrowed, his body tensed. How does he know about Ares? During the chaos and carnage of the war, under the guise of safety for the children, the parents had given their children over to the American government, who loaded the children onto buses to be brought to the safety camps with the hope they would survive. Unfortunately, Ben and Sandy were provided with an update once they arrived at the safety camp 6 months later. Their son had been kidnapped, along with the other children, after a military convoy laid siege to the blue bus they had been riding on. A pause, as Ben sized up the doctor. "I want to see my wife now." Dr. Blum shook his head. "Not going to happen, Mr. Cox. It's better if you fall in line and follow orders like the others." "What others?" He looked back and forth over the room. "There's no one else here." "Not in the room, Mr. Cox, but there are many here, and many more to come." Ben jumped off the bed, nose to nose with Dr. Blum. "I'm leaving. Gonna find my wife, and we are out of here. The war's over. You can't keep us here." Dr. Blum laughed. "Where do you think you'll be going?" "Out of here for sure." He pushed through the doctor, who rolled his eyes. "Do you have any idea where you are?" Dr. Blum sighed. He took a tiny round device from his pocket. Ben pushed through the door. "Mr. Cox is in the hallway," he said into the device. Ben ignored the doctor. "Sandy!" he called. The hallway consisted of clean, well-lit concrete walls and floors that stretched endlessly in both directions, with numerous doors, one every few feet, like jail cells with no bars. Double doors at the end in both directions, but so far away they were tiny to the eyes. "Sandy!" he hollered. The doctor stood in the doorway. "It's useless, Mr. Cox. All you're doing is making the situation worse. Come back in the room." Ben checked doorknobs. All were locked. Turned up the hallway. Checked them all. Sandy? You don't get it, Mr. Cox. Sandy! Ben tried another door. There were so many to check. Look at you, naked and screaming down the hall. You look ridiculous, and your behaviour is erratic. Sandy! Come back in the room, Mr. Cox. I'll explain more. At least with proper information, you can make an informed decision on whether or not you want to continue this search. Sandy! Ben's fears manifested in the doorknob snapping in his hand. Mr. Cox! He threw the door open. Inside, an adult male was stretched on a bed much like Ben had been, a needle in his navel being guided by... Ben's jaw dropped. The hallway's double doors swung open at the end of the hall. Ben did not notice who was coming. Probably not the best idea, Mr. Cox, but at least you know now. Well, you know part of it, but not the part that concerns you. What you're seeing is merely a necessary procedure for appropriate preparation. Ben witnessed the grey alien extracting fluid through a needle wedged into the man's navel. The alien continued without distraction. Ben stood, unmoving, confounded, his mouth agape, mesmerised, his brain twisting with a sharp pain, and then darkness. In her dream, Sandy returned to the safety camp a few days before word of the treaty would arrive. The sun hid behind a veil of grey clouds, the grand star descending, signalling an end to the day's work of farming duties, sifting through rice and wheat. On this day, she hadn't seen Ben in over a week. Standard protocol during her time in the camp. Men and women were separated. She ran her hands through her hair, brunette locks made even darker by matted sweat and grime. She gripped her hair in her hands to cool off the nape of her neck, while listening to the moans and groans from the throats of cohorts, when the soldier standing guard took her attention. The camp occupied a small town in the northeast. A wall had been constructed surrounding the camp under the guise of safety from their enemies, Chinese and Russian military. A soldier had taken his post on top of the wall. Over the years, Sandy made it a point to keep the soldiers in sight. Her reasoning was simple. Should the soldiers begin to stir, she could prepare herself quickly for any possible battle or siege that was on the way. Nonetheless, the practicer turned sceptical. Sandy noticed a shift a week prior, like a flick of a light switch when electricity ceased pumping power. A change in the wind that carried an uneasy sensation on its heels. At first, she paid it no mind, thinking the pregnancy created a false narrative with all the hormones competing for a place in her mind. Except that nagging instinct that something was truly wrong stayed with her. And here, on this day, oddly peculiar, the soldier had no interest in what was happening outside the wall. No, on this day, he turned his attention on them, to those inside the wall. And he seemed to be searching, devouring each and every one of them with apt focus, like sizing up an enemy, searching for any possible threats or insurgencies. Her stomach bumped and her hand went to it, instinctive, grateful the pregnancy continued to be a secret. "It's in the blood, dear," said Ellen, one of the women Sandy shared time and space with, her skin worn by age, hard labour, and days spent under the sun. Blotches and liver spots and creases led the observer to the eyes, one dark, the other a cataract milky white, and she always wore a dark shawl draped over the head and shoulders. Sandy was afraid of Ellen. She reminded Sandy of a gypsy or witch from a fairy tale. "Come again?" Sandy said, her eyes shifting from soldier to Ellen to soldier, then back to Ellen. Ellen had cut herself, transferring a wood bucket filled with rice to add to an already large trough of buckets. A thick wood splinter pinned in the bottom of her palm dripped with a thick stream of blood. She turned to Sandy, raising the bloodied palm, and caught a drop of blood in her unwounded hand. "The blood, dear," said Ellen. "All magic comes from the blood." Sandy cringed at the thought. She'd always been squeamish. Her stomach bumped, blood curdled. Magic, Sandy thought. If only magic was real. How wonderful would that be? Sandy understood she was naive, the result of an isolated childhood and her parents' death when she was 10 years old. Not that they had taught the young Sandy about the world she lived in either. They'd kept her under lock and key, never so much as offering a glimpse or advice of the outside world. They were always so cryptic with their explanations, living in an abundant and overgrown mansion as if luxury were a childhood friend. Sure, there were plenty of rooms for a child to explore, but as time went by, those rooms seemed more like a prison than a home. Years of neglect, isolation and secrets were as torturous as physical suffering. And she tired of secrets. She wanted to know the truth. Truth was like a blanket that keeps you warm in the coldest winter. "The blood, Sandy," said Ellen, who clenched her fist around those crimson droplets, shaking her hand in front of her face. "All is in the blood." The dream dissipated, and Sandy could see and feel a white bulbous light move through her brain with a soft fluttering that graced the back of her eyes, and her ears pricked to the sound of bleep, 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 kindling a sensation equalled to hollow pain, knowing something's different. Something's very, very different. Something's wrong. Sandy drifted awake to the sound of bleep, bleep, bleep. Her thoughts floated into existence. Something's very, very wrong. her body paralysed, incapable of feeling her limbs or even sense they still existed. Blurred vision beginning to focus, and she could see her surroundings. White concrete walls, herself on a bed with a heart monitor by her side. The steady bleep ringing in her eardrums when she noticed the wires and electrodes stuck to her skin beneath a white gown she didn't remember putting on. The room was quiet, the air stuffy and hot, burning hot, like standing near an open oven, the flow of heated air thickening in the room. Her mouth dry, she pursed her lips, attempting to swallow, as a rush of heat was forced down her throat, a throat that felt sore and swollen. What is this? She strained to think and remember. Remember something, anything that would provide a clue to where she was and how she got here. But the memories refused to indulge her want and need, evading consciousness, as if the memories desired to be kept a secret. Sandy lifted her head, looking down the length of her body. Yes, her arms were there, lying limp by her side, her body and legs too, wrapped tightly in the gown. "Hello?" she called through a cracked voice. The bleep, bleep, bleep jumped. Sandy cleared her throat. "Hello?" she hollered, forcing the word through laboured breath. "Help!" Her heart racing. Bleep, 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 bleep. "Somebody. Anybody. Please!" She tried to move her arms, her body, her legs, but with zero result. Tried again, pushing, forcing her body to move and lifting her head as if the rest of her would follow. Nothing. "Jesus, please!" She started to cry. "Please, please, please!" She slammed the back of her head against the bed, trying, forcing, doing anything to get her body to move. "Help!" she screamed. "Oh God, help me, please!" Sandy wept, tears cascading from the corner of her eyes, saturating her dark hair. And then the thought came, perhaps a memory, but she couldn't remember the actual incident. She saw the tiny woman at her side, as 3 more beings surrounded her, working, performing a surgery. She saw the baby, her baby, lifted from her stomach in tears and wailing cries. The beings surrounded her, holding her baby, clipping the umbilical cord, placing the baby on a table, and rushing it out of the room. The baby's cries wailed down the hallway, softening the further the baby was taken. Sandy saw herself on the surgery table, her eyes drifting to the being that took her baby, slightly taller than the tiny woman by her side, but not by much, and the skin was lighter, not as dark as the other who stood beside her. The being gazed into her eyes, as if seeing inside her soul. Sandy could see this thing, this unidentified being consumed by the work being performed, shoot her a stare that tore through Sandy's mind. Sandy screamed, hollered, and wailed. Being spoke telepathically. "Your child is safe. He is with us now." She heard the voice, repeating like an echo rattling in her skull, her laboured breath calming to short, quick, shallow huffs. Sandy's eyes stared wide, the memory stained on the back of her eyes, trying, struggling to push through it, to somewhere she could find help. One name forced itself over her lips. Ben. If you have enjoyed this sample, be sure to get your copy of the book at the link shown on your screen. And if you don't want to miss any future episodes, remember to like, share, and subscribe.